Thank you all for joining us tonight at this year's Promise Ball. It has been my extreme pleasure to chair the Promise Ball and to work these last 8 months alongside an amazing group of staff and volunteers to be able to present this evening to you. Doesn't this room look spectacular? If you're like the ladies at my table, you've turned the napkin rings into your own personal bling. So Karen, thank you. You have outdone yourself again. And thank you, Ulrich, and everyone at Novo Nordisk for all you do to improve the lives of our loved ones who struggle with diabetes every day. As a mother and sister of 2 such individuals who rely on your Novolog insulin to stay alive, I say to you, thank you. I hope you have enjoyed the silent and live auctions, the dinner, the dancing, and have your fingers crossed to win the raffle cruise. Hopefully, you have also caught a small glimpse of what finding a cure for type 1 diabetes means to us. Receiving the diagnosis that one of your children has type 1 diabetes immediately thrusts your family on an indescribable journey of pain and anguish, triumph and tragedy, fear and longing. Every family in this room who has a loved one who suffers from type 1 diabetes has a poignant story to tell. And tonight, I'd like to tell you mine. I'd like to take you back in time, back to 1961. It was a slower time. The world was at peace. John F. Kennedy was in the White House. We dreamt of putting a man on the moon, and little boys played at cowboys and Indians. There was no JDRF. It would be another 9 years before Lee Ducat and her group of determined young parents would band together. On the other side of the river, in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, a young family of 4 had just celebrated Christmas together. My parents had met and married while in their early 30s, late for that generation, and they were quietly awaiting the arrival of baby number 3. Little sister Barbara, who was 6 years old, was sick with a stomach virus. And so when their firstborn, Johnny, began throwing up a few days later, they assumed he had a simple virus as well. What they didn't know was that he had early onset diabetes, and he was entering diabetic ketoacidosis. By the time he arrived at the hospital on New Year's Eve, 1961, he was in a diabetic coma. There were no blood tests by fingerstick back then. The lab was closed. It was a holiday weekend. Precious time was lost as my brother's body continued to shut down. He did not survive the coma, and my parents lost their firstborn child. He was 8 years old. 9 days later, my mother gave birth to my sister Betsy, just after the death of her only son. It is a terrible thing when the natural order of life gets interrupted and a child predeceases his parents. If any of you have lost a child, then you understand the trauma and heartache that my parents endured for years. The rest of us can only stand back and imagine, and perhaps hold our children a little bit tighter tomorrow. As my parents began to heal, their renewed commitment to the beauty of human life resulted in their courageous decision to have one more child, even though they were then aged 41 and 43. 9 months later, and 18 months after my brother's death, I was born. My early childhood was a very happy and quite normal one, except that we never celebrated New Year's Eve. I always knew I had had a brother. I saw his sweet face in photos and wondered what he was like and how he could have died so young. I remember spending every August 29th, which was his birthday, and every Christmas, visiting the grave of a brother I never knew, killed by a disease I didn't understand. I would often look heavenward and ask Johnny how I was doing with his life. Heavy thoughts for a young child. 8 years pass, and one day, quite unexpectedly, my sister Barbara was not at home when I returned from school. I knew she had been having headaches and was unusually thirsty, but I thought that a visit to the pediatrician should have fixed everything. I remember feeling very scared when I learned that my 16-year-old sister was in the hospital. Without much delay, the doctors arrived at their diagnosis. My sister had type 1 diabetes. What is this disease? I thought. And why does it keep attacking my siblings? Would I be next? I even wondered if I could hug and play with my sister ever again. Was it contagious? We found a new normal in our household, one that involved fewer trips to the ice cream parlor, the absolute removal of all candy and sweet drinks from the house, and the introduction of after-dinner walks with my sister when her blood sugar was too high. The graveside visits continued, albeit less frequently. Time has its inevitable way of healing. But added to our routine was quarterly glucose urine testing for Betsy and me, the only two without type 1 diabetes. The fear that one of us would get diabetes was never far from any of our minds. My mother made sure we knew the telltale signs of diabetes, frequent urination and intense thirst. And so we watched, and we waited, and we hoped against hope that we would be okay. Truthfully, I breathed a little sigh of relief on my 25th birthday because I figured surely I am now too old to get juvenile or type 1 diabetes. You have heard tonight from Yurik that even at age 37, one is not necessarily safe. Thankfully, I never forgot those telltale signs. 14 years after thinking that I was safe, with great sorrow, I realized that my son was not. I didn't even take Austin, who was then age 5, to the pediatrician. So accustomed was I to the urine test strips that I had grown up using and that I had used during each of my 3 pregnancies, that I simply went to the local pharmacy, bought a test kit, and with trembling hands tested Austin's urine at home. Nothing could have prepared me for the shock I received in seeing the strip instantly turn deep crimson. My 5-year-old son, Austin, also had type 1 diabetes. Words cannot describe the anguish I felt when my own son was diagnosed with diabetes. It was surreal knowing that my parents chose to have me so late in life because they had lost their only son to this disease, only to have it pass to the next generation through me. I sank into a deep period of mourning that is unlike anything I have ever known. Diabetes doesn't just affect the one diagnosed, it affects the entire family. The sleep interruptions of the mother of a young child with diabetes far exceed anything you experience as the mother of a newborn. For on any given night, you may set your alarm 2, 3, 4 times if you can't get your child's blood sugars regulated to where they need to be to safely go off to sleep. And yet any time that I would begin to feel sorry for myself, for having to get up multiple times in the middle of the night when I was exhausted, I would remind myself that I was the lucky one. I got to keep my son, and my mother lost hers to diabetes. From the beginning, Austin has handled this disease like a fighter, determined not to let diabetes ruin his life. The road is an arduous one, mostly because we feel as if we are traveling without a roadmap. What works for one child or adult does not necessarily work for another. And just when we have figured out a good regimen of insulin to balance his exercise and diet, he grows again, and we're back to the drawing board. But through it all, Austin has been incredibly resilient and rarely complains. Not when he was a kindergartner, taking 5 to 6 shots of insulin a day. Not when he was in the 5th grade and was not permitted to attend his week-long school field trip because of his diabetes. Not when I disturb his sleep to do the 8th blood test in a day. And not even now, when he wears an insulin pump 24/7 and a continuous glucose monitor 1 week out of every month. Austin is truly my hero. My role in Austin's journey is to do whatever I can do to ensure that his future be as bright as he dreams that it will be. To that end, I check and recheck his blood sugars, making insulin and food adjustments as needed. Read, and read some more to learn everything I can about diabetes. Advocate before my senators and representatives for more government spending on diabetes research and faster FDA approvals. And of course, do whatever I can to raise money for research for a cure. And yet, even with all of my efforts, type 1 diabetes is a relentless disease and doesn't often take into account one's efforts. While Austin has enjoyed the benefits of fairly advanced tools to help him monitor his diabetes, many of which have been thanks to the work of JDRF and Novo Nordisk, and even though he maintains extremely good glucose control, his first spot of diabetic retinopathy was discovered in his right eye 18 months ago. Diabetic retinopathy is the leading cause of non-trauma-induced blindness. Thank God this first spot of diabetic eye disease has since cleared, but Austin is now on a regimen of going to the retinal specialist every 6 months. He is 15 years old. My sister Barb has just passed her 40th anniversary of living with type 1 diabetes, and for her, the disease has been even more unforgiving. While outwardly she still wears the same bright, cheery smile that you've seen on the images on the Fund a Cure cards, inwardly, 40 years of living with diabetes has taken its toll on her body. She has undergone 8 surgeries to address complications she has suffered due to diabetes. She has had issues with glaucoma, retinopathy, and neuropathy, which is nerve damage to her shoulder, that surgeries have more or less corrected. But she lives with chronic pain from gastroparesis of her stomach and intestines and rheumatoid arthritis. I ask you, should a 35-year-old mother of young ones be forced to undergo shoulder surgery in order to throw a ball to her children simply because she's had diabetes for 20 years? You see, the challenge of living with type 1 diabetes is not just the day-by-day struggle of managing blood sugars, counting carbohydrates, and dosing insulin. It is enduring the constant threat of future complications. And the person living with diabetes is not the only one who worries. Every parent with a child with diabetes worries that their other children will get the disease, and these children worry, as did I, that they too will be diagnosed with diabetes. Insulin is not a cure, but insulin has been a lifesaver. Thanks to the pioneering work of Novo Nordisk and others like them, insulin has been a game changer, and insulin will play a role in finding a cure. We are pleased to announce that all money raised in tonight's Fund a Cure will go directly to one of JDRF's main targeted research strategies, glucose control therapy research. This research aims to drive the discovery, development, and delivery of devices and drugs that improve glucose control, reduce diabetes burden, improve health-related quality of life, and prevent diabetic complications. Some of this research focuses on the development of glucose-responsive insulin and ultra-fast insulin. The right insulin will play a crucial role in the further development of the artificial pancreas, which we have supported in previous Fund a Cures. When we perfect the artificial pancreas system, we will have a much greater understanding of the pathways to a cure. For this to happen, we need insulin that is faster, smarter, and better than it is today. Research is our only hope for a cure, and research is indeed revealing the answers to the mysteries of type 1 diabetes. When I was a child, I never thought a cure would be possible. When my brother was diagnosed and died 3 days later, there was no JDRF. There was virtually no research being done for a cure. When my sister was diagnosed, JDRF was in its infancy. Research was beginning, but there certainly were not many tools yet available to help her live well with diabetes. There was no faster-acting insulin. There were no insulin pumps. When my son was diagnosed, JDRF had become the world's leading charitable funder of research for a cure for diabetes. By this point, we had insulin pumps and early-stage continuous glucose monitors. Now, thanks to your generous support in previous Fundacures and the successful research efforts of JDRF, we have a first-generation artificial pancreas available in 40 countries around the world. I can honestly tell you that at the rate at which JDRF-funded research is unlocking the secrets of diabetes, I am confident that we will be able to find a cure for this devastating disease. When my parents began their journey 51 years ago, they truly set sail all alone, with no hope for a cure. We at JDRF have been sailing toward our goal for over 40 years now, and are getting ever closer. We have one final port of call in mind: a cure. And when we cure type 1 diabetes, you can be proud to know that you were a part of the cure through your generosity tonight. On that day, together, we will reach our final port of call: a cure. Thank you.